to sit there and say trans women are women, no. Trans women are biological women, no. This twisted logic and the semantical games that you're getting into, this is the type of stuff that First Amendment auditors get into. This is the type of semantics that toddlers get into. I'm not touching you. I'm not touching you. I'm not touching you. This is the kind of stuff that your dad would smack you in the backseat of the station wagon for.
And half of these surgeries, they don't know what the outcomes are going to be. They don't know the long-term effects of puberty blockers. They don't understand what happens to young women who take testosterone for 30 years. There's not enough studies. I mean, we know what happened to Buck Angel. And the only reason we know is because he told us. So, Skye, thank you so much for being here on Voices with Vicky. I really appreciate it. I do thank you for being here, and I very much look forward to our conversation today because I think that we're both going to get a lot out of this. So,
oh yeah, I'm super excited to be here. I'm sorry I couldn't make it earlier. I had some scheduling conflicts, so I do appreciate you being so accommodating.
Skye, gosh, it's so hard to know even where to start because there's so many things to talk about, but one of the things that came to mind, especially when I saw some of your content, and I've seen you on Buck, I've seen you on Cassie, other platforms, and I really appreciate how level-headed you are. You have a lot of information to share. You're not hyperbolic about anything. You're very, paced in the way you speak. You're not, you don't seem extremist in any way. You seem very reasonable and based. And I feel like those voices of reason coming from the trans space is very important given what's gone on the last 10, 15 years with the trans ideology, trans kids, trans women in women's sports. And there's a laundry list of things that have gone on that have become very controversial and very mainstream too. Being trans, from my perspective, was always something that was very rare. It was in the LGBT space, obviously, but it wasn't all over the place. You met somebody occasionally that was, and you were like, okay, and you just kind of went about your business. But that's changed a lot, I think, in the last 10, 15 years. Why do you think that is?
That's a very interesting question. So I've kind of dug into this a little bit, and the more I dig into it, the more I start seeing certain patterns. And there's certain things that I start seeing that come into play. Around 2015, you started to see a lot of these organizations that were very big in the same-sex marriage. Right? So when we legalized same-sex marriage with the Obergefell ruling, these organizations that a lot of us were part of that were pushing for marriage equality, a lot of the leaders, a lot of the gay and lesbian and transsexual leaders left those organizations. Mission accomplished. We were out. We pieced out, myself included. We had accomplished everything we had set out for, but those organizations, they didn't fold. They continued. And so those power vacuums got filled by new players. And those players were people from the transgender and transhumanist movements. And these are people who had traditionally not had seats at the table. They were people that were excluded from the group because they weren't necessarily able to meet the rigid gatekeeping of the transsexual model, or they weren't looked at in the same way as gays and lesbians. They didn't adhere to the models. So the gays and lesbians kind of kept them in check. But when everyone kind of checked out of the organization and we started going into this new kind of kinder, gentler, just be kind kind of mindset that was taking shape around the first time Trump ran for office from these leftist groups, you start seeing the use of pronouns and that sort of stuff. And it started kind of allowing this sort of flattening and widening of the LGBT umbrella. We started seeing the addition of additional groups, additional letters, additional members who were never part of it. So the umbrella flattened and it widened. And when you do that, you let all sorts of new people in with new ideas, and You no longer have the ability to self regulate, self administer. You also have competing ideas where you no longer have just the transsexual with the medicalization, but you have self ID, where you no longer have to have the medical diagnosis. You could go in and say, I think I'm trans, have a 30-minute meeting with a mental health professional, do a little piece of paper that says, "Oh, I consent to all of this. I've been informed," called informed consent, and now you're on HRT. Previously, you had to do what was called the real life test for a period of 12 months before you get on the medication. That was eliminated. So the softening of all of the gatekeeping also happened around the same time. This
Yeah.
combination of forces created a change in what trans was and how it was introduced to the public. So people had this idea that trans was people like me, but the people being introduced or allowed to transition were no longer people like me. It
Yeah.
was more of a general public as an aesthetic on par with getting breast implants or being emo or goth. And that's a big change, but it wasn't sold to the public as such.
Yeah, and I agree with what you said, and especially about these organizations, Human Rights Campaign, GLAD. It all started out about workplace rights, marriage equality, things of that nature. And once those rights were achieved, and it was a really big deal, I was so myself personally was so excited at that time to achieve those rights that I was still riding the wave. I think a lot of people were still riding this wave, and then the attention turned to trans people. And I thought, well, if they're being discriminated against and they're being bullied and put down, I don't want that to happen to them. What happened to gay and lesbian people? So I was completely on board for some time, thinking, I guess ignorantly, that it wasn't about money, or that it was really about helping people, because look at all the wins we had just behind us prior. So to me, looking back on it, some of it was a little bit sneaky, the way it sort of crept up on everybody. And when it was too late, it had already exploded and dumped over into kids. You had the Jazz Jennings thing ramp up, and as like a poster child example of a trans child, and it was fed to the general public. A lot of people went all in on it, especially because of this idea that if you don't transition, you're going to off yourself. These manipulation tactics that were used to emotionally hold people hostage in a way, and hold them to it, that you have to accept this because this person will do horrible things if you don't. And that's when I started to say, well, wait a minute, like, people are still responsible for themselves. And if a child is saying this, it can't just be because they might be trans. The wheels started turning for me, I think, before some people. I like the way you explained this about the widening and the flattening of the umbrella. I think that's a good visual for people.
So let's think of it like this, and this is one that I've used quite recently, but frequently recently, because I said it once and someone said it really resonated. It's people my age, and I'm 45, so I was born in the late 70s, but people probably about age 40 and up, if you were to say that someone's a transsexual, they know what that is. If you say a tranny, they know what that is. They know that that is a man who is biologically male, who lives as a woman, probably had some sort of surgery to look like a woman, but it's a man. And that is what everyone knows it is. They know the tropes, right? They know what that is.
Hmm.
When you flatten it out and just say trans, what is trans?
Right.
Trans today now includes transvestite fetishists. Okay, well, people know what a transvestite is. It
Right.
includes a crossdresser. People know what crossdressers are. They know what a transgender person is. They know that that's a person who lives as a woman, but they may or may not have had surgery. But when you just say trans, people don't know what that is. What
Right.
is that? When you water a term down, it has no definition. So then what are trans rights? what what are you fighting for? And
Who does
then
that encompass? Yeah.
when you start talking about certain protections for trans people, and you start talking about the protections for transness, how do you encompass that? Because you have these organizations, again, Trevor Project, GLAD, HRC, that says, well, you're trans the moment you say you're trans. Well, that's not the way it used to be. Trans used to be you're trans the moment you start on your real life experience. That's why you had a tranniversary. That's
Right.
why you had a medical transition start date. There was all of this stuff that was medically kept. Like mine was June of 2003. So like I know these dates. It was June 6, 2003. So I have all of these dates. I know all of these dates because it's part of my past. And when you start breaking these things down, the general public can't keep up. And this is by design. This is done by the transgender movement. This is done by the transhumanist movement. This is done intentionally to break down language, to break down barriers, to make it so that there is no going back. And this is actually harming transsexuals, it's harming women, it's harming children, and it's detrimental to society. And this is one of the things that I try and raise awareness about. But when I do that, I catch a lot of strays from trans activists, from gender criticals, from all sides, because
Right.
I, I'm a traitor to the trans people. I'm the boogeyman to the gender criticals. I'm all sorts of different things. I'm whatever villain you want me to be. And I'm just sitting here saying, "Hi, I'm living my life, and here's my reality the way I'm experiencing it."
Right. Right. And like you, I kind of had a similar experience where being a lesbian automatically assumes a lot of things. It assumes you're a leftist. It assumes you accept any of this stuff going on with like trans women in women's sports or trans women being in spaces such as like lesbian dating spaces, and that I'm all about all of those things all the time. And as soon as I said, well, wait a minute, that's not necessarily right, I was villainized and told, to sit down and shut up, number one, but also I've been described many times as a couple of things. A self hating queer is one of them, which I find very interesting that people use that term so loosey goosey.
I hate that word.
I don't like it either. I think it's really vile that they've turned that into a good thing when it's been used against us as gay people, whatever, since I can remember. So there's that. And I'm called a self-hating queer, and I said to somebody once, you know what? I said, there's nothing more self-hating than referring to yourself or other people as a slur. I said, that's the most self-hating thing you can possibly do. And yet, if you use a particular term like transsexual, oh, you can't say that.
Right, right.
And a lesbian is a non-man loving a non-man.
No,
Everything's been redefined, changed around,
no, no.
and it's all very manipulative, sort of backwards, inverted language to lead you astray, and it just goes round and round and round. So I've been called and referred to as that, and also a troon sympathizer is another word.
Oh,
Yes.
I've been told I have internalized transphobia, which is very interesting because I talk a lot about being trans in great detail, more so than I think most trans people ever would or do on camera
Right.
in great detail. So I'm not sure how I've internalized it when I'm very vocal about it.
Exactly.
Um,
They're always using other people as a reason or an excuse to hold up an argument. So with the trans stuff, I see it a lot. The intersex argument, which I think is, again, the audacity of people to use some type of medical condition that someone has to support a trans identity. It just doesn't make any sense to me.
I completely agree. Intersex people do not want to have anything to do with the trans community. They are not part of the trans community. Intersex people have enough on their own plate. They
Yep.
have their own hurdles. They don't need this trans nonsense on top of it. If anything, the intersex people should be rightfully up in arms. And, I talk about intersex people being frustrated, and the fact that there is no such thing as a true hermaphrodite, which is one of the things that the trans activists like to point to. There's no
Yeah.
true hermaphrodite. There are two sexes. There's male and there's female. They point to genders and like, okay, you can't define a gender. Gender used to be the word sex until 1990, so gender is just another word for personality. That's how you're using it. You're using it as a replacement for personality. So I understand what the game is they're playing. They're trying to decouple all of the biological realities to say, look, if we can decouple everything biological, then that means we can transition everything. And there, ergo, we can transition more than human. It's a very transhumanist agenda. It's very akin to the type of things that Martine Rothblatt has proposed. And she's a huge transhumanist proponent. So when you start seeing the type of things that she promotes as a trans person, and she is a transsexual herself, who is giving a lot of money to trans organizations, you start seeing this pop up time and time again. And you start
Yeah.
wondering, is this just a coincidence that her agenda and the things that she's espousing and places where her money is going are now parroting the same lines at the what's the word I want to use here? At the expenditure of transsexuals.
Well, you're seeing a lot of people, like you say, they're identifying out of not just male or female, but they're identifying out of their species. You see this strange phenomenon going on where it's like, I'm a dog or a cat, and it's real. Like, people are really doing that, and it's all, to me, it's like a disassociation of some kind. And I don't know if it's rooted in SA or some other problem like a bipolar disorder or other types of mental disorders that maybe are a comorbidity, and that's why they're venturing into these other spaces, because those comorbidities haven't been addressed properly, and because this whole self ID thing is such an easy grab to pacify themselves, that's what they're going for. I mean, I hate to sit here and give armchair diagnoses, or I'm not a psychologist, but it's fascinating to watch, and it's also very scary.
Now, I've heard and seen a couple different ways that people have kind of talked about being trans, not just transsexual, transgender, or transhumanist in regards to like Therians or furries or what have you. The first theory that I've had is the people that are associating, it's either they're people that were raised by a single mother. And so the mother is basically treating the usually boys as failed girl. Well, the older men as failed boy, or failed boy, boys as failed men, and men as failed boys. No, wait, boys as failed men, men as failed boys. Yeah. So they're treating them as, they're infantilizing them. And when little boys can't grow up to be men, then they start disassociating because they can't reach those ideals because the single mothers can't empower them. The
Mm-hmm.
alternative one that I've heard is that these are people who are escaping manhood. They don't feel that they are adequate in terms of desirability, financial success. They don't want to deal with it. They've been coddled. These are people that just do not want to take up the role of manhood. And so they are basically looking at this as a way to escape responsibility. And they think that if I'm a dog, if I'm a cat, if I'm a woman, then, oh, if I'm a woman, then a man will take care of me, because they have it in their head that the man is the keeper of the family. They don't understand that they have other obligations. They only see it through these very transactional lenses because they
Wow.
have these narrow views. And I've seen this espoused by a couple different psychologists in a couple different clips. But with the young girls, now that's typically more of a trauma response.
Yeah.
Usually now with young girls, especially young girls, like when we start seeing like girls transitioning, we start seeing the rapid onset gender dysphoria. We see girls getting on puberty blockers. We see a lot of that, especially around age 12,
Yeah.
13,
Right
right
around
around the
puberty.
Yep. So I mean, who wouldn't want to take a magic pill where you're telling me that the boys won't look at me, the men won't look at me, I won't be treated as a sex object. I can go back to being one of the boys. I can go back to being smart and funny instead of being pretty, and I won't have all these weird smells and these things growing and all of these bodily functions and that monthly cycle and all of these weird things that are making my body uncomfortable. You mean I can stop all that and I can reset this power dynamic where instead of the people leering at me, I can make that stop? And I get to be the one that's now gets to do the leering? Sign me up, please. And
Yeah.
that's what these girls are being basically told. Hey, here's this magic little pill, and it's going to solve all of your problems. All you need is a little bit of manhood. And that's what they call it. They call it, vitamin
Man
T. They call
juice.
it man juice.
Yeah.
They're not calling it testosterone. They're not saying I'm taking anabolic steroids, which is what they are. They're
Hmm.
not saying I'm going to get ripped like Barry Bonds. When you sit there and tell these fathers and these mothers that you're giving them the same stuff as Mark McGuire had when he was cranking homers, they look at you like you're insane, but it's the exact same medications.
Hmm.
And it's disturbing.
To sort of piggyback on that too, it is, if I were to go in to the doctor and say, hey, I'm really into working out right now and I want to pump more iron and get really jacked, give me some testosterone, they would never, ever give it to me under a million trillion years. They'd say it's dangerous, don't do it, you're going to atrophy, la, la, la. But if I went in there and said, I think I'm trans, and I think I'm a man and all that stuff, they would sign me up much faster to do that.
I,
And then it's okay. And then it's fine.
I and you'll get like a ridiculously high dose of testosterone too that could be life alteringly dangerous, almost fatal, to the point that you have kidney failure, liver failure, heart failure. So you roll that dice. On the flip side, you also right now, if you wanted to have a double mastectomy because
Mhm.
you're at risk for breast cancer, you're at the back of the line. If you
Yeah.
needed a hysterectomy because you were having ovarian cysts or endometriosis or something, you're at the end of the line. You have to wait because the trans people get to go in front of you. My
Which is
wife,
insane.
yeah, my wife has been trying. She is a skin cancer survivor. She had skin
Uh-huh.
cancer in a very very sensitive area that if we had not caught it, she was, according to the doctor, 3 weeks away from it being inoperable, which means
Wow.
fatal. So we caught it, and 3 weeks, 3 weeks away from losing my wife. So I'm very passionate about this particular point.
Yeah.
Now, this was skin cancer in a very private area. She wanted to get her breast removed as a result of this. The insurance won't cover it. Now, we can pay out of pocket, but insurance won't cover it. We're having to go
Right.
through gene testing. She doesn't have the Jewish genes. We're trying to get it covered through insurance. If she says she's trans, insurance will cover it, no problem. We're not
Yeah.
going that route. Same with a couple other conditions. This is what hundreds of thousands of actual females are dealing with. They are
Yeah.
dealing with these chronic pain conditions from their reproductive systems, and they are crying out in pain. They are on opioid medications, but the doctors won't help them because they're not trans. They're told, "Oh, but what if you want children in the future? What if you want to have another baby? You need your husband's permission." They still say stuff like that to this day. It is incredibly misogynistic the way that the healthcare system is treating this. But if they turn around and say, nope, I'm trans, it's fine. It's absolutely disgusting the way that this is happening. And it's under the guise of gender affirming care. But my wife is female. That is her gender, and it's not being affirmed. So where is the care for her? This is a
Right.
double standard, and it's infuriating.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I find that, I actually know somebody that was diagnosed with breast cancer just recently. I don't even know what her options are. It's a very aggressive form. It's one of the most aggressive forms of breast cancer you can have. She's only in stage 2, thank God. But I thought about the fact that, like, these young girls that are having their breasts removed because they think they're trans and then they regret it later and they can never get them back, right? And then there's people like this person who wants to do everything in their power to save their breasts because they like them and they want to keep them, and they've been put in this position where they might have to not have them anymore. And like you said, she could potentially be in the back of the line because you've got all these young girls lining up to have a double mastectomies that really don't need them, and they're being tricked into getting them, as far as I can tell, because some of them aren't even of age.
And they're not even the good surgeons. Like, the results are bad, they're leaking, the nipples are falling off, they're necrotic, the girls are being butchered, and they think that, "Oh, look, I got this super scar. Look, it's a badge of honor." No, no,
Mm-mm.
the reason that you have that scar is because you have a bad surgeon. The doctors love the fact that you want those scars because it makes it easier for them, because then they can be an even crappier surgeon and do an even worse job, and you'll just be like, "Oh my gosh, thank you." But down the road, you're going to regret that, because that scar is going to be there. That
Yeah.
scar is going to prevent you when 10 years down the road you want your breasts back. Breasts are not just sacks of fat, they are actual organs. They serve a purpose. Joanna Olson Kennedy, who did the largest puberty blocker study in the US and didn't publish it because she didn't get the results she wanted, she was removing breasts and telling the girls that regretted it, "Well, that's okay. You can just get breast implants. Breast
Not
implants are not
necessarily.
breasts, and those scars will prevent you from getting them." That's what you're not understanding. This is tragic, what is happening to these young females under the guise of trans. And none of this even matters, because the people that are pushing all of this, they're only really pushing it because they only care about the boys. They only care about the young boys with gender dysphoria. That's what all of this is all about. It's about the young boys, because they don't care about the young girls. They only care about the Hunter Fishers and the Jazz Jennings. They want to make sure that those people go through and they don't have to deal with the multiple facial feminization surgeries and the big broad shoulders and having to go through and work about a feminine voice and all that stuff. They don't want them to have to deal with that. They don't want them to have to feel like, they're men. They want them to be these, what were they called? Modern day castratos. That's what they're going for. They're going for modern day castratos, but
Wow.
feminized with
Yeah.
hormones for either a vicarious reason, in that my life would have been better if I had done this because I think so in my head, so I'm going to live vicariously through you, or I'm get aroused by looking at this, so I'm going to create this. And either way, that is absolutely disgusting. And a whole lot of people are getting wrapped up in this medicalized culture that do not need to be. And I'm tired of it. Leave the damn kids alone.
Yeah. And I, to me, I find it interesting when you have a conversation with somebody that is firmly on the side of doing this to young boys or young girls. And they say, well, it could be a trans person I'm talking to. And they say to me, well, I knew I was trans when I was a kid. And I'm like, so what? So I knew I was gay when I was young too, but I was still a minor and things could have changed for me. Maybe I would have decided differently. You can't label children as trans or gay. They're young children that are still growing. They're still going through experiences in life. They're going through puberty still. You don't know what you're going to be in 20 years necessarily. And so I find it interesting because a lot of people ask me, when did you know you were gay? When did you know you were gay? And I always tell people, I think I knew when I started going through puberty and, having romantic feelings. I mean, it's normal, but that doesn't mean I should be advocating for underage kids when they're gay or they're this or they're that. Like, no, there should be, I mean, obviously you should have maybe some kind of resource, maybe in high school, but prior to that, that doesn't make any sense to me. And times have changed too, as far as these days. But back when I was growing up, there was so much more homophobia. I mean, you really did have to hide on some level. But like today, I don't think it's as nearly. It's much more accepted. Let's put it that way. So I don't think young people are dealing with it on this level that's so debilitating as what they try to say it is. Because I do believe, like you said, you used the word vicarious, that people are living vicariously through these young people because they had a shitty past or they were bullied or whatever, and they have wounds that haven't healed. So they're projecting their own bullshit onto young people. If that makes sense. I kind of
It does.
roundabout way, but
Yeah,
yeah.
no, that makes sense. I mean, I didn't have the language to know I was trans. I didn't know the word trans until I was a teenager.
Mhm.
However, I talked about the girl in my head and tried to remove my own genitals when I was a toddler.
Wow.
I've been in therapy since I was a small child, probably 5 or 6. Um, and we talked about like body dysmorphia. I was diagnosed with gender identity disorder, transsexualism as a child, and then again as a teenager, and then transitioned as an adult.
Right.
So everyone in my family thought I was a gay boy, and that's what everyone thought I was going to grow up to be. Boys are cute. They don't turn me on. I don't want to sleep with them. There are different types of women.
Hmm.
I'm a trans woman, which means I was raised, all my friends were female. My mom raised me, my dad raised me. I have this kind of hybrid kind of raising by my parents where my mom was a lot more lenient towards my effeminacy. My dad was a little more strict, but my friends were female. So all of my friends, they were all female. I spent a lot of time doing girly things. I had 2
Hmm.
brothers. I spent a lot of time doing boyish things. My wife is more manly than I am. She will tell you that to your face. I'm okay with that. I do guy things, I do girl things. I think that's just being a person. But,
Exactly.
my idea, I take care of my wife. I dote on her. I dote on my kids. I say my kids, my animals. I have 5 cats, 5 dogs. A lot of animals. That's how I am. I am like the therapist to all my friends. That's my role. That's how I go through the world. And I'm just a big caring person. Whether that's a masculine trait or a feminine trait, I don't really care how other people see me because at the end of the day, as long as you get my name right, that's really the most important thing. Pronouns, I don't care. If you call me he and I look like this and you think I look like a he, then that's on me. I didn't do enough to get you to initially use she her pronouns. That means I need to try harder. That's all because it's my mental health problem. I need
Right.
to deal with it. I don't need society to conform to me. I need to conform to society. And I think that's part of what this trans movement has lost is that this used to be about you acclimating to the society, but the transhumanist movement is very much they want to redefine society. And that's scary for a lot of people because it tears down barriers. It tears
Yeah.
down all sorts
Boundaries.
of boundaries. That's why we got people going into female sports, female locker rooms, female changing rooms, all those places transsexuals never went before. As long as females keep giving trans people what they want, they're going to keep pushing. But this is basically the whole meme of tell a trans person no and you see the man come out. It's a bunch of people being upset that they didn't get their way. And I, for one, am very happy they didn't get their way because I'm sorry, you can be upset that you're not legally defined as a woman under this piece of legislation, but you can still sit there and say, colloquially, I am a trans woman. That is a type of male who lives as a woman, and you can define it. But to sit there and say trans women are women, No. Trans women are biological women? No. This twisted logic and the semantical games that you're getting into, this is the type of stuff that First Amendment auditors get into. This is the type of semantics that toddlers get into. I'm not touching you. I'm not touching you. I'm not touching you. This is the kind of stuff that your dad would smack you in the backseat of the station wagon for. And
Right.
and so it's very frustrating and annoying to, the adults in the room that are watching this. So, I think Richard Dawkins just came out the other day, or yesterday or today, and was talking about the protests in the UK about how all the trans women were going to mark their territory by peeing on everything, and said, "Could you think of anything more masculine in the animal kingdom than a bunch of males marking their territory?" I mean, nothing,
Yeah.
nothing. Not, I cannot imagine any point in time a female protest where all the women were going to say, let's all get together and pee. I remember bra burnings. I remember those. Those were a
Yeah.
thing. I don't remember peeing circles.
That is just the fascination. To me, it screams that it's not trans, it's kink, it's maybe anagonophilia, it's something else. It's other. It's not trans, but they're just saying it's trans, which really sucks for real trans people. I have to tell you, that makes me angry for them because their representation, your representation, is so poor because of these people and the Dylan Mulvaney's and these people that they have nefarious or alternative agendas for why they're doing what they're doing, and it has nothing to do with being a transsexual. And can getting people, because a lot of the general public doesn't even understand, like we were talking about earlier, what a transsexual even is. They know what a transsexual is, but everything's called trans now, so it's become very confusing as to what's what. And if it's not something you think about all the time or talk about a lot, or you're not exposed to those types of things, you're going to be really turned off and really taken aback by a lot of this. And some people have argued that the 2024 election was won by Trump in large part because of all of this nonsense. That's how irritated even people within the LGBT community are about it. And yet they won't acknowledge what's happened or take any accountability for what's happened. And so it's up to people that aren't being terrible, like you and me, to say something. And then we're getting thrown under the bus by those people. It's just terrible. The whole thing is just, I'm smiling right now, but it's out of like complete disbelief when I really think about it.
I was talking to a friend last night, and friend has a child. The child is in college now. The child is trans. The child has been told for the better part of the last decade that they can be whatever they want. That includes the opposite sex. The child has transitioned and now realizes that they cannot become the opposite sex. They have been on puberty blockers.
Yeah.
Um, they are trying to get surgery. They do not have enough penile material to do an actual vaginoplasty.
Mm-hmm.
They have to do a colon sigmoid.
Which is dangerous as hell, isn't it?
Dangerous because they increased risk of infection, necrosis. You're removing a piece of your colon, so you've got more more surgical incisions, more potential for seepage. It's going to smell like colon forever. You have to dilate it to keep it open. It will potentially excrete sludge or fluids that are discolored because of the fact that it is colon. And you may potentially rupture the colon or the vaginoplasty through the dilation process or through rough vaginal sex during the first year. And that's if this person even has any sexual feelings or the ability to orgasm, because puberty blockers may leave them infertile. Now, the dad is very upset because
Mm-hmm.
the doctors told them that this wasn't going to happen, and I told them this would. And I was trying to talk them through this last night because they're
Yeah.
devastated because their child is devastated. Now the
Oh,
child is going, I wish I never transitioned. No one told me this.
yeah. This is what we're seeing time and time again. That's so
And, I,
devastating and awful.
and I'm just like, this person, they're in their mid 20s. Well, early 20s. They're in college. So, yeah, early 20s. I talk about this kind of stuff on my channel. I know a lot of people that are going through these issues, but they don't talk about them super publicly because it's embarrassing. It goes against the narrative. Who are they going to tell?
Yeah.
They tell the trans person that's talking about it because who else is going to listen?
Yeah.
And so the more I talk about this, the more people will tell me these things. But it's just devastating that this happens with such frequency and regularity, and it's swept under the rug like it doesn't happen, or there's no such thing as regrets, or that this is just the way that it is. Acceptable losses is a term that was used in the military for bombing campaigns. It was
Yeah.
very, very common by General LeMay when he was doing the firebomb campaigns in Japan. Firebombing uh, was a war crime, and acceptable losses is maybe something that a general thinks about in terms of casualties when you're trying to take a military objective. Acceptable losses are not something that you should ever be thinking about when you're talking about children or human lives in a surgical capacity. But that's
Yeah.
the way that these people are thinking and acting and treating your children.
It, it's actually mind blowing that nothing has been done about it. You hear the story, you've heard about some lawsuits and some, people trying to band together to stop it.
So one of the executive orders, there was one for protecting kids. Uh, it's the one that stopped federal funding for clinics that provided puberty blockers. Is a
Okay, yep.
big one. That one had a bunch of stuff to look into, plans on how to do more studies, more long-term care, follow-ups, that sort of stuff. And then the NIH has been instructed to actually do more studies by Trump and RFK Jr. to look into detransition or long-term study care studies into regret, detransition rates, etc. So this could potentially be the first long-term study into detransition rates that's not done with a uh, self-administered study or self-administered survey, or using NI or NHS data from the UK, like the CAS report. So it could be interesting to see what comes from that. But a lot of
Yeah.
those executive orders did have some stuff. One of the things tucked in there is that he requested Congress to look at creating a law that would allow for financial compensation for children and parents of minors who were misled by providers who provided surgeries or puberty blockers. But I haven't seen anything that's been presented yet. I have been looking, but I haven't seen anything yet.
Yeah. And like I said, it's early on, so I shouldn't be jumping the gun too much per se, but it's just that's the thing that really, when you really break this down, especially when you have almost an entire generation of young people now that are mutilated in some way. The story is about not having any romantic feelings for people. Like that is so barbaric, and it reminds me of things that they did in Nazi Germany to people, experimentation of people. And I hate using that as an example because, as you know, everything is cloaked in Hitler this and Nazi that these days. But for real though, that it to me it's a big experiment. And half of these surgeries, they don't know what the outcomes are going to be. They don't know the long-term effects of puberty blockers. They don't understand what happens to young women who take testosterone for 30 years. There's not enough studies. I mean, we know what happened to Buck Angel. And the only reason we know is because he told us. And so it's like things like that, like the risks, they don't, what do they call it? Informed consent? Eh, no, I
How
don't
can
think
you
so.
be informed about something that we don't know the answer to?
Right.
That's that's like saying you're getting informed consent about Area 51. Hi, I'm going to give you informed consent about Area 51, but you can't go there and you can't tell anyone. Like I could make
Yeah.
anything up at that point.
Right. Right. And and you're asking 14-year-olds whether or not they want to have children one day. And 99% of them are going to say no because they're 14. Like, this is common sense.
I mean, I had a hard enough time making that decision and I was 23.
Here's a question for you to kind of just bring it back full circle.
Sure.
What do you think? I mean, I know that there's a lot of problems, so this is a hard question, but what do you think? What would make you happy to see happen going forward in the trans space or just LGBT in general? I mean, I guess it's a loaded question, but what do you hope for the future?
Oh, goodness. Well, in a perfect world, I'd love to be able to hit the rewind button and go back and put everything back the way it was, but that's not possible. We're not going to be able to go back. So we're going to have to figure out some way to go forward with the way things are. And I think it's going to be third spaces. I think if you're going to be trans, it's going to have to be one of those. You're going to have a little marker on your license that says you're trans. It'll just be a little box that says trans. You'll have a bathroom and it just says, gender neutral or trans or something.
Yeah.
And it'll just be akin to its own third representation. It'll have to be its own separate category. And that separate category will be male, female, trans, and it will be treated just the same as male, female, trans. There won't be any co-mixing of this. There'll be single sex spaces for men, single sex spaces for women, and then single sex spaces for or trans only spaces or something. Like there'll be all sorts of contentions, and you'll still have the stupid questions of, well, what about this, what about that, what about this, and it'll always come back to, well, there'll always be exceptions, right? You're always going to have the people that are like, well, what about Blair Wade, what about Buck Angel? Well, you'll
Yeah.
always have people that are going to go into the opposite bathrooms. The whole idea is that you use the one that's going to cause the least amount of disruption and distress. The reason
Mm-hmm.
that you have these laws is that if you're in the wrong bathroom, you can be kicked out, right? This performative protesting stuff, like Marcy Rentgen, that just makes the community look bad when you do stuff like that and you get yourself arrested doing the rosary in the women's bathroom in the Florida State Capitol. Like that, there's no reason to do stuff like that. Just it's going to be it's either going to be separate because the exceptions that were carved out for transsexuals. Unfortunately, the transhumanist movement and this transgender ideology, it destroyed all the hard work and all the goodwill that myself and all of my trans sisters did over 50 plus years.
Yeah.
They destroyed it in a decade, and it is quite possibly one of the most heartbreaking things I've ever had to witness.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I saw the same thing from my vantage point, just as a lesbian, you know. Um, 20 years ago, it was something that was not as nearly as accepted as it is now. Nobody cares. Being lesbian's boring because everybody's focused on trans, right? But my point is that I don't know that these people that are doing this stuff understand or care about the L, the G, the B, or even a large portion of the T that I call them the OGs. I don't think they understand it. They don't respect their elders. They don't care about any of that. It's all about control and domination of a space. Any one they want, you pick. And that's been hard to watch because it just gives so many people a bad name, like you said. And I hope that the activism stops. I wish they would stop for like one day, and I want to just be like, okay, did anything bad happen to you today? No? Okay, go another day without having to be an activist. Did anything bad happen to you today? No? Okay. Like, they're all just crying wolf at this point, is what I see. And so for the ones that really do face some kind of discrimination or have in their past, because we all have, all of us know what it's like, have something really crappy happen to you that was blatant discrimination for real. And even then, we weren't necessarily going out and protesting it. We coped. Sometimes we just coped with it. We didn't necessarily even do anything about it. I'm not saying that's the right answer in every case, but these people are just making stuff up. They're just making stuff up. They're finding it's professional victimhood, oppression points. That's a trendy thing too, not just in LGBT, but you see it in other spaces, and it really diminishes people that have had actual bad things happen. Skye, thanks for being here. This was great. So much good conversation, and we should do this again.
Oh, I appreciate it. I thank you so much for inviting me. Thank you for, again, accommodating me. I'm looking forward to coming back and doing this again. And for anyone else, I will catch you in the next one.